This presentation will provide an overview of students with learning disabilities. In this presentation, you will learn about the history of learning disabilities, definitions of learning disabilities, prevalence, characteristics of students with disabilities, and best practices for educating students with LD. The term learning disability was not introduced until 1963. Until then, researchers described these children as having word blindness and functioning as if they were brain injured. Up until the 1960s, the focus of intervention for children with learning disabilities was on developing their perceptual skills. Perceptual skills are visual perception and auditory perception. Visual perception is the ability to identify, organize, and interpret sensory data received by an individual through the eyes. Auditory perception is the ability to identify, organize, and interpret sensory data received by an individual through hearing. For examples of specific visual and auditory perception skills, go to the link provided on this slide. In 1963, the term learning disability was first introduced by Sam Kirk. LD was specified as a disability by federal legislation in 1969. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, it was clear that focusing on teaching perceptual skills did not improve learning. Thus, the field shifted from focusing on perceptual skills to providing direct instruction in academics. This continues to be the focus today, as there are a multitude of studies that show the significant positive impact academic strategies and interventions can have on the learning of students with LD. There is controversy over what a learning disability actually is. There are two definitions of LD that are the most commonly used. The primary definition used is the federal definition included within the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, or our federal special education law, and the second definition is proposed by the National Joint Committee on Learning Disabilities. The federal definition of learning disabilities, which is included in an IDEA, or the federal special education law, is as follows. A disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself in imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculation, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. For more information about perceptual disabilities that are referred to in the federal definition, there are two links here that you can go to. It's important to note that dyslexia is not simply a disorder that involves reversing letters or numbers like some people think. To understand more about dyslexia, here is a link that you could go to. Developmental aphasia is caused by brain damage, and this can be complete or partial language impairment. It can affect any area of language, including difficulties with or inability to comprehend language, pronounce language or form words, speak spontaneously or name objects, read or write. So if a student has developmental aphasia, this can result in having a learning disability, and also the student will be identified as having a speech and language impairment. The second definition that is used is from the National Joint Committee on Learning Disabilities, and this definition is as follows. A general term that refers to a heterogeneous group of disorders manifested by significant difficulties in the acquisition and use of listening, speaking, reading, writing, reasoning, or mathematical abilities. These disorders are intrinsic to the individual, presumed to be due to central nervous system dysfunction, and may occur across the lifespan. Problems in self-regulatory behaviors, social perception, and social interaction may exist with learning disabilities, but do not by themselves constitute a learning disability. You could see that this definition would be more meaningful to teachers, and it also includes a reference to the fact that many students with learning disabilities do have difficulties with self-regulation and with social interaction and social skills. Again, self-regulation and social interactions are not, and social interaction difficulties do not mean the student has a learning disability, but it is a possibility that students with learning disabilities will have those problems. Approximately 3.7% of the school population are identified with learning disabilities. Thus, learning disabilities is the highest incidence of disabilities of all the categories. Students with learning disabilities make up about half of the students receiving special education services. And again, the ratio of boys to girls identified as having learning disabilities is at least 2 to 1. The number of students identified with learning disabilities has dropped over recent years, and this is likely due to the initiation of response to intervention and multi-tiered systems of support, which requires educators to put evidence-based practices into place early on to prevent the development of a learning disability. In many cases, the cause of learning disabilities is unknown. Generally, though, there are two potential causes of learning disabilities. These are physiological causes and curricular and environmental causes. Physiological causes can be a result of brain injury, heredity, or biochemical. Brain injury can occur at the prenatal stage, meaning when the child is in the fetal stage. This can be a result of mothers having drugs and alcohol, if the mother contracts measles or smokes cigarettes. Perinatal causes of brain injury or during birth could be a result of the baby being deprived of oxygen during the birthing. And postnatal, meaning after birth, brain injury can occur during a high fever or head injury, an illness, or an accident. As far as heredity goes, when one or both parents have a learning disability, their children may have as much as a 30 to 50% chance of also having a learning disability. And for biochemical causes, this is a result of chemical imbalances in the brain. When considering curriculum and environmental causes, students can develop a learning disability due to poor nutrition, from living in a highly adverse emotional climate for an extended period of time. It could be a result of toxins in the environment, such as lead poisoning. It could be a result of lack of stimulation, for example, lack of adult modeled language, limited exposure to books, and lack of varied cultural experiences. And the saddest cause is the result of poor instruction. And this is why response to intervention and multi-tiered systems of support are being put into place, because if a student with a learning disability receives quality evidence-based instruction, they will likely not continue to develop academic problems. And these evidence-based practices, when they're implemented early on, can actually prevent a student from being qualified for services under the learning disability category, because they reduce that learning achievement gap through those evidence-based practices. In general, learning disabilities are characterized by academic underachievement. This means the student is performing below his or her intellectual potential even after intensive systematic interventions have been implemented to reduce the learning gap. As mentioned earlier, students with LD are a heterogeneous group with different strengths and needs in cognitive, academic, social emotional, and behavioral domains. The next several slides will highlight some of the most common characteristics of students with LD, but remember that not every student with LD will display each characteristic discussed. There are a variety of different cognitive characteristics associated with learning disabilities. First, students with learning disabilities often have difficulties with attention. They might have extraordinary difficulty attending to only the important stimuli in the environment for long periods of time. They may get easily distracted and end up paying attention to everything in their environment instead of what is most important. Also, students with LD may have difficulties with perception. As was discussed earlier, this means that they have difficulty processing what is seen and what is heard. They might have difficulties with memory, and this can result with difficulties with short-term memory and/or difficulties with long-term memory. Students with LD may have difficulty with information processing. This might result with difficulties with metacognition. This involves thinking about thinking and knowing what you know and what you don't know. They can also have difficulties with considering how new information being learned relates to other information they've already learned, and being able to make those connections to support their learning may be difficult. They might have difficulties applying learned concepts in a novel learning situation, so they might have difficulties with generalization. There are a variety of different academic characteristics for students with learning disabilities. Many students with LD have reading impairments, and this can include difficulties with phonemic awareness, alphabetic principles, fluency, vocabulary, and/or comprehension. For more information for each of these areas of reading, there is a link provided here. Students with LD can also have difficulties with oral language, including difficulties with phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and/or pragmatics. And for more information, here is a link provided on those oral language components, which are also discussed in the speech and language impairments module. Some students with learning disabilities have difficulties with written language. This could be due to difficulties with motor coordination needed for handwriting, or difficulties with spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and composition, which is organizing thoughts and presenting thoughts in a logical manner. They might have difficulties providing enough details to convey the intended message, and also difficulties with word choice. For more information on written language learning disabilities, copy and paste the link below into your browser. Some students with LD have disabilities in mathematics. This could be difficulties learning basic math facts, computation skills, mathematical principles such as estimation, mental calculation, probability, mathematical concepts such as measurement, geometry, and algebra, and problem solving. And there's a link provided here for information on learning disabilities in math. Some students with LD have social and emotional difficulties. Some students struggle with social perception. This means students with LD may have lower self-esteem and are less accepted by their non-disabled peers than other students, and might be more likely to be rejected by their classmates. Some students struggle with social competence, and this means difficulties receiving, interpreting, and responding to the subtleties of interpersonal interactions. Difficulties making and keeping friends could be a problem, and this may result in feelings of loneliness and depression. There's a link provided here for more information on social competence in students with LD. Some students with LD may lack motivation to learn. This could be the lacking of internal motivation due to low self-esteem. And this could be due to neurological dysfunction or learned helplessness because they failed at so many academic tasks throughout their life. Many students with learning disabilities do have some behavioral challenges, and these behavioral challenges can be a part of the disability or a result of the cognitive, academic, and social emotional difficulties. Common problem behaviors for students with LD include off-task behavior, shouting out, and aggression. There are a variety of best practices that teachers can use when working with students with LD in classroom settings. Of course, the use of direct systematic instruction is a very powerful lesson format to use with these students, and there is a module on systematic instruction that explains this. But direct systematic instruction is a teacher-led approach that includes clear demonstrations of new information in small segments, the practice that is guided by the teacher, and immediate feedback is given to students during this guided practice and when they move into independent practice. There are decades of research that support the use of strategy instruction for students with learning disabilities. Strategies are techniques, principles,